Hello everyone and welcome back to Destiny. We recently learned a lot more about the new supers, and we got hard confirmation that they will be part of a third skill tree that will be nestled right in the middle. We have the top tree and the bottom tree for every subclass, and every subclass is going to be getting a third middle tree. And of course those will contain a brand new super, a brand new melee, and of course a couple other perks that work really well together. And this is the first time that we're seeing some really great synergy between the 4 perks within the tree, and I can't wait to play every single one of them. They're going to be coming, of course, with Forsaken and the Destiny 2 2.0 update that is going to be coming September 4th. So in this video, we're going to break down every single one of those subclass trees and see what perks they have in store for us. There's a lot to go over here, so let's get into it. Alright, so jumping right into it, the new subclass options are essentially going to be a third branch within your subclass inspection screen. So currently there are 2 paths, one at the top, one at the bottom. We're going to have a third option right in the middle. You're going to be able to unlock this once per week per character. So essentially, let's say first week you want to go for your Gunslinger, you'll have to wait a week before you can unlock Arcstriders, and then you'll have to wait another week before you can get the Night Stalker path. So think about what you're going to be doing the first couple weeks. Think about what super you're going to want right away. Apparently we're going to have the option to choose which one we're going to go for first, so at least there's that, but I'm not bummed out that you can't unlock all of them all at once, because that does pretty firmly suggest that there's going to be some kind of quest to go on to unlock the other ones, which just means more content for us to play through. Very cool. But anyways, let's jump into it, starting with the Hunters. And first up we have Arcstrider with the new path, Way of the Current. First up, we have the Melee Override, which is Tempest Strike. While sprinting, deliver an uppercut that juggles enemies into the air and leaves a trail of arc energy behind. I've seen this in action, it looks pretty awesome. The next perk in the cluster is Ebb and Flow. Electrify any target you use an arc ability on, melee electrified targets to disorient them, and to restore grenade melee and dodge energy. And you'll see this across all of the subclass paths that they seem to be a lot better at synergizing between the different perks, which is, I guess, the silver lining with them being clustered together. Next up, we have Lightning Weave. Melee an enemy to increase your reload speed for a short period of time. I'm very curious to see how effective this actually is. Are we going to get something as fast as something like Outlaw? I don't think it will be, but I suppose we'll have to wait and see for ourselves. Next up, we have Whirlwind Guard. Activate a shield to deflect projectiles. We've seen this in the Vidoc. But what we haven't seen is the fact that this will also charge up your arc staff to deal up to triple the damage for a short period of time. That's pretty insane. I didn't think arc staff needed to do even more damage, but I'm not going to be complaining. Moving on, let's move on to the Gunslinger's path, Way of 1,000 Cuts. Starting with the Melee Override Knife Trick, deploy a fan of flaming knives that set enemies on fire. This is perfectly complemented with the first perk, the Burning Edge. Enemies burned by your abilities restore dodge energy. And then playing with fire, getting kills with Knife Trick, restore melee energy. This reminds me a lot of Way of the Warrior with the Arcstrider, where you can maintain a lot of uptime with your melee and dodges, and it looks like this is going to synergize real nicely. And then of course we have the brand new super, Blade Barrage. Fire a volley of flaming knives that detonate after impact. We got a pretty good look at this at GameInformer. Essentially all of your knives are going to be either focusing on one target or distributed against many if that happens to be what's in the area. It also looks like you can spin around quickly and deploy a second set of knives, so I'll be very curious to see exactly what you can accomplish with this super. Finally, for the Hunter, we have Way of the Wraith for the Night Stalker. Starting with the Melee Override, we have Corrosive Smoke. Sends a line of smoke that slows and damages enemies caught in its path. And then we have Shattering Strike. Strike an enemy while True Sight is active to reduce their damage output. And True Sight is essentially an ability that lets you see enemies through walls, which can be granted by flawless execution. Precision kills grant invisibility and True Sight, which is also something that's granted by Spectral Blades, the new super. Gain 2 Void Blades, move around with invisibility and True Sight, also possibly increase the speed with every successive strike. Now this last point was something that I happened to notice while playing it, but I have also heard it from other people, so it's very much possible that it is in fact true and part of the super. I have to say, This is probably my favorite of the new supers that I've played around with. This feels like Arc Blade, but way better, and it's going to be really hard for me to pick between this and the new Arc Strider path. Let's move on to Titans with Striker's new path, Code of the Missile. Let's start with the Melee Override Ballistic Slam. While sprinting, lift into the air and perform this melee to crash down onto the target, damaging nearby enemies. If you've been hearing that Death from Above is back, this is the closest thing to Death from Above, not the actual super. This one behaves exactly like how it did in Destiny 1, where you're up in the air and you can kind of choose where your target's going to be before you slam back down. It doesn't do anywhere near as much damage as a super, it is a melee after all, but it does have a pretty good area of effect. Moving on, we have Inertia Override. Slide into picking up ammo from defeated enemies to automatically reload your weapon and increase weapon damage for a short time. That sounds pretty compelling. Next up, we have Impact Conversion. Hitting enemies with Thunder Crash restores super energy. So it looks like, depending on how many enemies you were able to hit or kill with your super, you're going to be left with a good amount of super energy to give you a boost to the next charge. And that leads right into the new super, Thunder Crash. Activate to soar through the air like a missile, maneuvering in air and crash back down for massive area damage. So this one is a little different from Death from Above, because you can kind of pick where you want to be going, and you can also activate it just from the ground. You essentially sort of launch up into the air and sort of arc back down, but you're going to be able to actually maneuver your character a little bit and decide where you want to hit before you slam down. Moving on for the Titan, we have the new Sunbreaker path, Code of the Devastator. Starting with the melee, we have Throwing Hammer. Throw a flaming hammer at your enemies, pick the hammer back up to instantly recharge your melee. So this is a pretty cool ability, I think. You're going to be able to throw it at an enemy, it's going to sort of bonk off of them and land on the ground, and then you sort of have to hover back over it and grab it, and then you'll restore your melee energy yet again. This is pretty cool. I don't know how much damage this is going to do, but I'm liking that we get little tastes of the super, almost like a mini super, within the other subclass abilities. Moving on, we have Roaring Flames. Damaging with solar abilities increase their damage for a short time, and it stacks up to 3 times. So what does this mean? That means that every, let's say, throwing hammer that you throw at an enemy is going to do increased damage, stacking up to 3 times. And that does include your grenade and super as well. Moving on, we have Tireless Warrior. Picking up your throwing hammer triggers health regeneration. So this is also another great way of sort of making sure that you stay alive, which is pretty important for a Titan. Moving on, we have Burning Moll for the actual super. Summon a large hammer to swing at enemies, deal quick concussive blows, or slam to deal massive damage and send forward a trail of fire. So this is very similar to the Iron Axe as it was in Destiny 1. It's going to be giant, you can slam it down to send forward a trail of fire, make those fire tornadoes, but where it does differ is in the R1 ability, or the sort of right bumper ability, where in Destiny 1 with the Iron Axe you could do like a 3-hit combo. In this case, when you mash that button, it's actually going to be sending you into sort of a 360 type whirlwind, which you can use to sort of like knock out a bunch of enemies that might be grouped up together. Pretty awesome. Moving on, for the Sentinel Titan, we have Code of the Commander, starting with the melee ability Tactical Strike. Melee causes a void explosion, setting off nearby detonators and spreading more detonators that attach to nearby enemies. So the detonators is what's really interesting about this path. Let's talk about that a little bit more, starting with Controlled Demolition. Void abilities plants a detonator on the enemy. Damage the enemy again to cause it to inflate and to cause a massive explosion. So you can think of this sort of like a sticky bomb that you have to sort of pump up full of bullets or whatever other kind of damage, and then it starts growing and growing, and then it'll eventually detonate. And if that happens to be a Tactical Strike melee, it'll send more detonators to any enemies that are nearby, which is pretty interesting. Definitely very creative. Moving on, we have Resupply. Controlled Demolition detonations also heal you and your allies and restore grenade energy. So again, we're getting into that cyclical nature of a lot of these new subclass paths. Moving on to the super, we have Banner Shield. Activate Block during Sentinel Shield to create a large mobile barrier that blocks incoming damage while allowing allies to shoot through it. A couple things that are true about this that haven't been actually officially confirmed from GameInformer that we've seen is the fact that shooting through the barrier actually extends the duration of banner shield. So this is something that you're going to want to coordinate with your team, and they're going to want to definitely take advantage of to make sure that banner shield lasts as long as possible. My only worry with this is things like splash damage still getting through, but the shield is about the size of a towering barricade, so you can imagine how effective that can possibly be against things like missiles. Next up, we have the Warlock, starting with Stormcaller and Attunement of Control. The melee is Ball Lightning. This one sounds pretty cool. Produces a slow projectile that shoots arc projectiles at enemies. This at first sounded like Arc Soul, and especially with the footage that we saw of being able to consume a grenade to produce a Arc Soul, I naturally believed that it would be part of this skill tree, but as you're about to find out, it's nowhere to be seen. Ball Lightning does not sound like it's an Arc Soul. Moving on, we have Pulse Wave. Taking damage increases speed for you and your nearby allies for a short period of time. We have Ionic Traces. Collect Ionic Wells that drop from enemies you defeat to regain ability energy. And these will sort of appear as if they're sort of like healing wells that drop on the ground, except they're going to start going towards a certain direction, and you kind of have to intercept it. It's very interesting that this is part of the neutral game, so we'll see exactly how this plays out and how quickly you can actually regain your abilities. Moving on, we have Chaos Reach, which is the super override. Fire a forward beam of intense arc energy. Cancel your super early by activating your super again, retaining unused super energy. So this is pretty insane. We haven't had any supers that are anything like this. Essentially, if you're using your super and you decide maybe you're done using your super for now, maybe you've killed the enemy that you're firing at, you can actually cancel your super and save what you haven't spent, so you can then have a very huge boost potentially towards your next super. So again, the question of that Arc Soul, here is the footage that we saw in that Vidoc. The Stormcaller is consuming the grenade to produce the 20-second Arc Soul. Some people are speculating that it's in fact a new perk on an existing tree. Of course, we'll have to wait and see exactly what's going on. That could very well be possible. They said that they are making some changes and some buffs to the current paths, so we'll see if that actually involves changing something like adding something as intense as Arc Soul to another subclass tree. If I had to guess, it's going to be for the top tree. That probably doesn't get a whole lot of play. This would be a pretty good way to get people to use that tree a little bit more often. Moving on, we have the Dawnblade with Attunement of Grace. This is the sort of healer subclass for the Dawnblade, starting with the melee override, damage an enemy to empower nearby allies. So this is pretty interesting. Basically, you can see this as R1 does increase damage and L1 does healing, and that's of course with the perk Divine Protection. Charge your grenade to turn it into a healing grenade. You can then toss it onto the ground, and anyone who picks it up, including yourself, will immediately restore health, and it grants an overshield on top of that. Pretty cool. Moving on, we have Benevolent Dawn. Empowering or healing allies, regenerate your melee, grenade, and rift abilities. Again, all about the synergy. And then of course we have the pretty cool super, Well of Radiance. Plant your blade into the ground to cast a large rift that empowers and heals at the same time. Pretty cool. Now, one thing about this that I was personally able to observe when I played the game at E3 is the fact that you can actually destroy the sword that is in the ground. So if you're coming up against your enemy team, you can actually focus down fire on the sword that is creating that Well of Radiance. So you have to keep this in mind when you're facing off against your enemies. Now, last and definitely not least, we have for the Voidlock, Attunement of Fission, starting with the melee Atomic Breach, a ranged melee ability that causes a void explosion. I think this is pretty cool because it gives your Warlock a ranged attack again, and then you've got Handheld Supernova, draw power from your super to overcharge your grenade, and then unleash a deadly flurry of projectiles. Now, this description, of course, these are all ones that I've written, and this one is something that I'm not super clear on. I'm just basing this off of the footage that we saw in some of the GameInformer coverage. Now, the description for this by GameInformer does not really match what is going on screen. In fact, the description is pretty disappointing. It just says that it's a close range ability, but what we saw in the GameInformer coverage is basically like a very fast and very aggressive scatter grenade. Moving on, we have Dark Matter. Void ability kills grant a small amount of health along with Rift, Melee, and Grenade energy. And then of course we've got the Super Override Nova Warp. Teleport short distances and unleash multiple Void explosions. Charge your explosion for increased range and damage. So this is going to be a true roaming super for the Void Lock. Essentially you can teleport around the map, kind of float around like you do with Stormcaller, except what you do to damage is press the super button again to unleash that Void explosion. And what you can do is tap it very quickly for smaller bursts of explosions, smaller explosions, and then you can hold it down to charge up a much larger explosion. Of course, a larger explosion will use up a lot more of your super energy. So again, a very tactical super. You can kind of get into exactly where you need to without the enemies realizing it, deploy your smaller explosions, or if you're going up against a much larger enemy, like let's say a Lost Sector boss, you can go ahead and let out the full energy. Now, of course, this video, as you know, is coming out before we have full control over these supers. We're going to be taking a much closer look at these when Forsaken comes out later this fall, and I will most likely be revisiting these supers and giving you my first-hand impressions and the best way to maybe use them with different weapons or different armor pieces. Of course, we have random rolls coming back and the armor perks, so it's going to be really interesting to sort of play around with these different builds and to really see what's possible with these new subclass trees. Anyways, let me know in the comments below which one you're going to be going after first. Which one are you most excited about? Let's discuss. Drop a like if you enjoyed this video and subscribe for more Destiny content. And I will see you all next time.